how is this the appropriate project for this farm in the city of Austin?
Okay. The land is pretty expensive land. The developer designed the land under the club from the owners of the Golden Gateway Tower, and it's part of the reason that housing groups are against him, because he would be selling land and the housing people don't like him because he rents to corporate pied-à-terre. It's good land use because of the way that it activates the waterfront, the way that it really opens up these street blocks, energizes them, puts in activities and uses that would be of interest, and to make this side of the Embarcadero as vibrant as the other side, where we know people love to walk. People should love to walk on the city side of the Embarcadero also. So that's one part, just the physical form that it creates, and where it does the housing in that block, having the retail below, the cafe, shops, and restaurants is exactly what everybody would want to have in order to activate space. And sure, you could put a hotel there perhaps instead, but a hotel doesn't, it brings in a lot of people from out of town, but the ground level spaces would probably not be as good as what we have here. The ground level spaces that affect people walking along the Embarcadero, because this would be something that would be aimed at the more discerning San Franciscans and not the t-shirt shops and souvenirs. For the housing, the housing blocks are, in the context of where they are, they provide a good transition from the waterfront to the tall buildings in behind them. And that came out of a planning department one-year study, urban design analysis, followed for by Supervisor David Chu, who was seeking consensus and unfortunately did not get it for reasons I've talked about. But that follows sort of a basic fundamental urban design principle of the city's historic urban design plan, which calls for tapering down from tall buildings towards the waterfront, from downtown towards the waterfront, which is what this project does, as you can see, going in both directions like that. So I personally think that housing offers, even market rate housing, offers more for the city than a hotel would, because it spends off a lot of money for affordable housing, and for the ground level uses in the public realm, where we walking along the waterfront or biking along the waterfront would really benefit from what's being proposed there. So I just don't understand thinking that it's not the right land use for the waterfront. Sure, one could put in a bicycle center on the port's parking lot as the neighborhood plan has proposed, but that doesn't give any return to the port, nowhere near as much as the parking does now, and it doesn't help the port bring in dollars, which it needs. The port subsidizes its maritime operations, its all of its public open space, with the exception of the last two bond issues that gave them a little money for the first time in history from the city, and the historic preservation that it does, where when it has fires on historic piers, it has to fix up those piers.
John, we're almost there.
The question about land, what's the best use of the space?
So I'm assuming, really what I asked was, why is this the appropriate project?
Why is this the best project?
So I'm seeing why,
right.
So basically the
why it's not the appropriate.
Why it's not.
I mean, the question, right, is really, what do we want? And I mentioned Donald Trump before, and the reason I did, in part, my mom used to live in Miami, so I spent 10 years flying there, and driving from Fort Lauderdale Airport to her house, it's her side, and passing the Miami Trump Towers, and the long string of other towers. And Miami's made a choice for their waterfront, different choice than San Francisco's made, at least to date. And that's to allow developers to build tall, expensive condo towers that bring a lot of money, and allow people access if you live there in the towers. We've made a choice, at least to date, to keep the height limit strict, not to not build, but to keep low height limits on a waterfront, to keep it open to the most people. And this project would begin to change that. Whether we want housing on the waterfront is a real question, actually, and that, in fact, is not typically allowed by the state. Most port property is not allowed to be used unless there's a special exception for housing. It's allowed to be used for open space, retail, recreation. The Exploratorium is actually a great example of a perfect use, because it's a unique use of a pier a few blocks up, as you know. And the way they went about it required some special exceptions, because a museum is actually not an allowed use typically either. But the Exploratorium, unlike this developer, worked closely with the community and the neighbors, and and the advocates to work through the issues around the use. They also proposed some bigger buildings that they reduced. And I think that's become, while it's not as much of a revenue generator as building a luxury tower on that pier, I think it's a great use of our waterfront that opens it up. So just circling back to what's the best use for this site, Alex sort of briefly referred, while a controversy was brewing a couple years ago, a community plan was put together by Asian Neighborhood Design, Fernando Marti, some of you may know, and they did actually a very lengthy study. I'm happy to share it with you if you'd like. It's very interesting, not just about this lot, but about all the seawall lots, as these are called, on the city side of the Embarcadero in this northern part. Because there's, as I said, not just one, but several that all are going to be at issue at some point soon. And they proposed, for this site, they proposed a green transit center was the sort of use, which would be a mixture of retail and recreation, basically, bike repair, rental, marine-oriented recreation to interface with the ferry building, as well as some cafes and other retail uses. That would be within the height limit, that would generate revenue and pay for itself and then some, and that would invite people in and use the space.
So let's open it up.
Let me just say one thing. The State Lands Commission reviewed this project, and the port is trading its parking lot lands for all this open space lands, which it will be leasing to the developers. So in fact, what the port keeps here is all open space lands and very good use of public trust lands.
So I know everybody's got questions. I don't know if we want to set it up for Denise, since you're not a member of the council, you can't, my apologies. But Jeff was the first one.
Oh,
I think.
no, I was just,
So then I'm going to go with Dave, because Dave is patiently.
Been sitting here, hot to trot for a while.
Yeah.
John,
Yes, sir.
I have not heard you mention the fact that there's a 22-story building right next to the building that's proposed. And I have not seen anything in the literature that mentions the fact that there's a 22-story building right across the street. Could you explain to us why that is not fraudulent?
It's not on the waterfront, and there's not a height.
John.
Can you let me answer the question?
Well, let me finish my question.
Okay,
If you go down to, well, no, the reason this comes up is if you go down to Pier 3 now and look across the street, that's the parking lot. You see this huge building right behind it. And the question that immediately comes to mind is that, what the hell are these people talking about?
What do you lose, I guess is what you're saying?
No.
What view do
It's
you
like,
lose?
where's the wall? That isn't there now. I mean, you got this huge building right there now. You got a smaller building in front of it. What is the issue?
Well, if you stand in front of the ferry building right now, or in Sue Bierman Park, here, you can see...
No, I'm talking about standing here.
Can I finish talking?
Yeah.
If you stand in front of the ferry building, or in Sue Bierman Park, which thousands of people do every day, you see Coit Tower and Telegraph Hill, and a beautiful view of our city. If that project is built with the increased height, you won't. The reason, and I mean, I take the point, obviously their whole strategy is to say there's bigger buildings not too far away, so what's the big deal?
Right.
That's the essence of the question. I mean, the big deal is it's our waterfront. And we've drawn a line, we're not drawing it now, we've drawn a line historically in the band that's port-managed land on both sides of the Embarcadero. And that's why the height limits are lower there. The height limits are higher in the financial district for that reason. There is an argument to make that we should build up as close to the water as possible. I would just argue as someone who cares about not just the site, but the whole waterfront, if we're going to make that choice as a city to build up closer to the water, we should do it in a broader way and be thoughtful about it and understand what we're doing. This is a piecemeal, spot zoning, one-off way to raise height limits, and it's absolutely going to set a precedent to do the same thing. So I guess the big deal and the reason we're focused on that is it's on the waterfront, it's a height limit increase, and it will block the view of people of Coit Tower from people who visit the ferry building in Embarcadero.
Totally
From the
unfolded.
ferry building, from this point to the
Convincing.
south, it blocks no views whatsoever of Coit Tower.
Okay, fair enough. So
Is that
Tom
what
and
it's
then Joni?
yeah, I want to frame this, because I appreciate the argument against, I honestly do. And I think rich people, they shouldn't have their 5 to 10 million. That's the core of the NoWallOn. It really is. And you, Donald Trump, get us all scared. Well, you're supported by Boston Properties, which is also a rich corporation that's building a high-rise south of the market. Boston Properties, ever hear of them? So it's really a battle between two rich developers. It really is.
Really?
And you're not
So-
really honest.
so
But let me,
what's your
so my
question?
Well, are you going to ask a question?
This is a question. So this is my insult.
You
So
should come sit over here.
I'm not insulting him. I'm talking about
Well-
campaign. Come on, you're biased. Of course, all your questions. So here's my question, John. you're talking about this establishing a precedent. As you know, and you also didn't say this, the developer could have easily made 85-foot high buildings and had a higher wall, a corner wall, at the embarked area, and probably any future developer will have to do that just because of the economics. In other words, more density, higher building at the waterfront instead of the lower building. The reason the developer, and that was the original developer's plan, as you know. Alec Bash, working with elected people on the board, some who have supported this from day one, and other city planners got the developer to scale it down so have a less dense building at the embarkadero. And that property, that section is unique. How can you, and I want really Alec Bash to answer this because he understands the law better than I do. That particular plot of land is totally unique in terms of its zoning and its city planning construct. So it's really not a precedent. So that's the framing that Alec, how is it?
Hold on, I thought there was a question for John.
Yeah. Well,
And
I want the
somehow
vote.
you danced around the main
I want them both to answer this actually, but I want Alec to do it.
Can you clarify the question?
Okay. What is the precedent given that plot of land has unique constraints and unique city planning standards, which ask for scaling down, which don't pertain to any other plot of land in the downtown area? They don't.
That's not true, but
Well,
I'll let him
that's fine.
explain how that's
That's
true.
why I
You guys
asked
both
it. It's
understand the question.
technical.
Let's
I'm
start.
sorry.
I think so.
I'm getting
Let's
to a
start.
technical question, so both of you.
Let's
should-
start with Alec and then John.
Right, so Alex, you have
John.
John.
Finish.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, this is a very unique property. It was the subject of a one-year urban design analysis that David Chu asked the planning department to do. And planning looked at all the parking lots the port had along the waterfront. And they recommended no change in the height limits, the 40-foot height limits for all the parking lots north of Broadway. For south of Broadway, for this site, they did recommend a change. They recommended a change in the height limits in order to have the buildings taller in the rear next to these taller buildings alongside and shorter in the front along the Embarcadero. And why did they do that after 5 large community meetings with hundreds of people there and a diverse of comments? Well, a fundamental reason is the city's urban design plan that I held up for people to admire earlier. I got this in 1971, which calls for tapering down, as I mentioned, from buildings towards the waterfront. And tapering down is exactly what happened here, as I pointed out earlier. And as you look at this, you'll see that there's a natural flow of things that is being responded to here. So it's the urban design analysis that happened that preceded all of them. The changes from the project plan where the sponsor originally had 84 feet, 8 stories on both buildings. That was changed in response to what came out of the urban design analysis. The urban design analysis came out of the city's historic urban design plan calling for tapering. And if you look at the site, the 84-foot height limit applied to the whole site. So 16% of the site had the height raised a little bit. 84% is being built, and under Prop B would be required to be built below that height limit. And of that amount, 5 to 6 stories, and here 1 to 2 stories, and open space in here. It is that open space and 1 to 2 stories there is required to be built at those levels by Proposition B. That is, 51% of the site is well below the 84-foot height limit. That too is very unique about this site. And nowhere else on the northern waterfront, no developable properties are around any cluster of tall buildings which would enable any self-respecting design professional to say that this is tapering down from other buildings towards the waterfront or towards lower buildings. Nobody. This is the only place that this could happen, the only place that planning would have recommended it, the only place that I would support it, the only place that any design professional would have supported it.
John, do you want?
There are several other seawall lots. The Northeast Embarcadero study that the planning department did do, studied all of them. And all of them are, as I said, except for this, the only unique thing about this site is it's not at 40 feet, it's at 84. And that's because that's a legacy of the Embarcadero Freeway, largely, that used to be there. The only reason it really steps down significantly is because they've raised the height limit so that the back steps up. Otherwise, it would be virtually not apparent that it's stepped down significantly. It is true that it's a policy. I guess where I differed with the way you stated it, Tom, was that it is true that it's a policy in the whole city that we scale down buildings to the waterfront. That's accurate. It's just not true that we, as a policy, until this proposition, if it passes, that we raise other height limits to have the appearance of stepping down. And so that's where I guess I differ on that score. And then just maybe to conclude and echo or sort of underscore the point earlier, we call this a wall in the waterfront, really the first brick in the wall, because the Embarcadero Freeway, which used to be there, was not literally a wall, it was a freeway, but created the effect of a wall that divided our city from the bay. And we are deeply concerned this would begin to do the same, both with this project and the others that will surely follow.
You won't even compare apples to oranges. This is apples to a snake.
Let's move on. Peter?
Okay, I had a few small minor questions that maybe you could answer. First of all, I think I like when you talked about how the new project, proposed project would guarantee public accessibility. Are there other ways to guarantee that public accessibility you talked about without putting up this luxury condo project? Yes, no?
So, in order to provide the public accessibility that's being proposed here, there needs to be some economic engine driving it in order to pay for it all. And the developer is putting a lot into it. He's going to get $2.5 million a year, and it gets to all the public improvements here. Over the course of 50, 60 years, it's going to be getting between 400, the city and port between 400 and 500 million. All this gets, the city and the port are both benefiting from that at $2.5 million a year, 400 to 500 million over 50, 60 years. Net present value of that is about 140 million. But all those economic spin-offs and the jobs that are being created here and the public accessibility can't happen unless there is someone motivated to build the project. And the motivation either comes from being able to make a profit or getting funding from somebody else who just wants you to do it to provide for the public good. So someone's got to do it, either government, charity, or for profit motive. And I don't see anybody else stepping up there to produce something like this.
Okay, the second question I had was about, you're eliminating the parking spots from here, and you said that you'd replace it with an underground parking lot?
Right.
Let's see, where exactly would the underground parking lot be?
Okay. I'm not sure if you can all see it here. Let me just move this out for you.
Okay. Now we're opening up the wall.
I know. Here's the wall, as Tom said. Okay, so right now the parking gets accessed off of the Embarcadero, which provides for a traffic problem there sometimes. The proposal is to have it here and over here, ingress here, egress over here, and as I said, it would be parking replacing what is being lost or has been lost.
But then wouldn't you also have to have parking for the tenants of the
Yes, there's parking there also. There would be 127 parking spaces for the people living here. That's for the 134 units. There would be 200 public spaces. There'd be 81 public bicycle spaces, lockers, showers.
Let's see, but then in that case, wouldn't that mean that you'd have to segregate the parking spaces for the public versus the ones for the tenants? For that to happen?
Yes, they'll be separated, and the way it'll actually work, some of the people living there will have their own private marked spaces. Others will have a right to have a parking space, and spaces will be reserved for them, but they won't have specific spaces reserved for them.
But it'll all be the same garage, though. So
All be one garage.
With markings.
It's like different levels, different levels.
Okay, so I guess the ultimate question I had is that, yes, there's a housing problem in the city, so why would the city need more market rate condos, given that we already have a tremendous state of economic inequality in the city, so why worsen it by this project?
Well, the market rate condos, it is market rate. It's responding to people's demand who want to live in the city, and they'll be able to buy them here, or they'll be able to buy them someplace else. It's 134 units, it's not a huge amount, and it does spin off some good affordable housing monies that will produce units equal to anywhere from 25 to 40% of the amount being built here. So it's a package deal in a sense. Some of it just helps people who are well off, others of it helps people who are not well off.
I think, can I respond
Yeah,
to, if I can, I'd like to respond to all three.
Yeah,
Let's see if I can do it.
But do it.
Let me start with the last first. I think that sells San Francisco short. This, and let me just refer to a debacle we all just are about to finish going through, which is called America's Cup, which I was also involved in as a neighborhood leader at North Beach and North Hill and et cetera. It will be over in 2 weeks. That's the best news I've heard all day. But the pitch that America's Cup, Larry Ellison company made and Gavin Newsom bought and the whole city stuck with is take it or leave it. In December of 2010, we're going to go to Rhode Island unless you sign the deal on the dotted line now. And you give Larry Ellison 7 peers, gives no money required. We'll just do our best to raise money for all your costs, all that stuff. That's how we got into that mess. And I think that sold San Francisco short. And I think this pitch that you have to build luxury condos to get a little bit of public benefit sells San Francisco short too. Now, we need money to come from somewhere. That's true. But we should demand much more. As I said, at a minimum, we should demand, I would think, that real middle-class or affordable units be built in any project. And if not, then it should be significant, not 2% donation to the city's housing fund. But I also think that there's no question, this lot, which is near the Ferry Building, the Exploratorium, is going to become something. There are not a lack of developers or, maybe the government, but in answer to your question, your first question about how could we make it more accessible without making luxury condos, the city last November passed a parks bond and waterfront bond that paid millions of dollars for waterfront parks. I mean, that's an idea for the space if we really want to. But there are others, and the Exploratorium, I think, is a great example. That's not a free giveaway. That's a business that pays for itself, pays the port rent, and provides an incredible amount of free open space in the middle. You can walk through, look at the water, you can jog around, as I did this morning, all the time. That's a great model. This model of ultra-luxury condos for a little public benefit, I think, is selling itself short. And you had a middle question? No, if I can remember anymore.
Oh, it was the
Maybe.
parking.
Oh, park. Thank you. Because this is absolutely not a transit-first project. The garage will be 330 something units, 320, 330 units. Underground garage there in an incredibly congested part of our city. And that's in large part because, and I did mention, the 134 condo unit owners all or almost all get a parking space. That's not, when BART is so close by, transit first is supposed to mean we encourage people who are going to live in that part of town to use public transit. Allowing them all to have a car is the opposite. And then the loss of the competition and the congestion is one reason the Ferry Building has been very concerned about this project affecting business all along. But the parking is also an issue that a number of the environmental activists have brought up in opposing the policy.
Yeah, but it fits the transit policy, and it is only replacing parking that is now accessible or has been accessible off of the embarking arrows. So that really supports the transit
We gotta move on.
policy.
So John and David and John.
You mentioned an alternative might be Green Transit Center. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? And then I'd like Alex to respond to the feasibility.
Sure. I mean, I bring it up. I need to present you with a plan. So, I mean, if people are interested, the Asian Neighborhood Design Plan is on the website.
Okay.
I can find it
You
easily.
could email it
To give you the details of it.
As
As it was the process. I mean, that came about as part of an actual good process, which engaged the community, Chinatown, North Beach, people who live there, people around the city, to come up with a set of ideas, engaged a professional planner, Fernando Marti, Asian Neighborhood Design, and came up with some concepts. There's no developer ready to build it because we have to see what happens here. But I actually think that if the voters reject B&C, very quickly there will be, whether the port initiates it or the community, a push to do something there, because I don't think anyone wants to see this remain fallow. And that will be an idea, and again, I'd be happy to share it with you so you can compare it for yourself.
Okay. So no one's included any economic feasibility analysis in that study, and that study, funded largely by Boston Properties, was not trying to look at economic feasibility. It's trying to look at what would raised the most hopes amongst the people who were opposed to this project. And as I said, the club is never going to allow anything to happen if they can possibly stop it. If they do, it would only be for
What
the
club?
parking lot.
What Bay Club?
Oh, the Bay Club.
The members of.
The Bay Club's not.
The members of
involved
the
in
club.
this.
Okay, well,
Yeah, but,
I was in your ear.
Let me also tell you, I'm super excited because I've been in a lot of meetings in this room. This is the largest gathering that we've had. And it's entirely appropriate that as we kick off this fall season, we've got to be big. We've got to get ready. We've got to get out. Now let me tell you one piece of really good news. You may have seen that there was an independent poll. There was a poll done of where we are. And you may have seen that Measure C, we're doing extremely well. Over 10 points margin. Yep. And even with Measure D, we're a couple points ahead. B, we're a couple points ahead. But I will tell you, the bad news is we know we've only seen pennies of the $10 million that are going to come raining on our head. And this is a battle about big money versus people. It's about corporations versus the grassroots, and this is where all of you come in, and this is why it's so important for us to be here. I want to just echo one thing that Mayor Agnew said, which is there are so many reasons why this is wrong. And one of the things that I've realized as I've been around town is different arguments work for different communities. When I've been on the west side, what I find is if you tell folks, do you want to live in a city that looks like Manhattan, or do you like living in a city that looks like what we've got now? Folks say we want to live in a city of San Francisco. If you are in the Mission, or if you're in the Bayview, and say, do we really need to have luxury condos? Folks don't really like that. If you're talking to parents and families, and you say, you know, there's a recreational community of thousands of families and seniors and kids, you want to rip that apart? They say no. So I know all of you are educated on these issues, but just think as you're out there and how to do that, because voters are just starting to pay attention.
Now I want to talk about the 11 steps to fascism, and this is part of the prison industry. So the first step to fascism is to invoke a threat, like the war on terror. And then the second step might be to establish secret prisons.